Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Preparing for Your Community Health Choices Appeal. I'm Kayla McNally, the Project Administrator at the Pennsylvania Health Law Project, and I'd like to quickly go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. This webinar is part one in a two-part series presented by PHLP attorneys David Gates and Amy Lowenstein. Part two will take place next Tuesday, July 17th at 1 p.m. You will need to register separately for that webinar. I will put the registration link in the chat box. You will have the opportunity to submit questions today by typing them into the Q&A pane of the control panel in Zoom. You may send in your questions at any time during the webinar. We will collect them and address them throughout. If you have technical difficulties at any point, please hang up and dial back into the webinar. If the problem persists, you can email me at event, E-V-E-N-T, at phlp.org. And now I'll turn it over to David.
Thank you, Kayla, and good afternoon. So as Kayla mentioned, this is the first in a two-part series regarding community health choices. The first portion is on person-centered service planning. Person-centered service planning is the process by which the plans that spell out the services that individuals would receive through community health choices is done. The second part, which will be done by my colleague Amy Lowenstein, will be done, as Kayla mentioned, on July 17th regarding grievances and appeals, and I'll ask Amy to give you a brief synopsis of what she'll cover on the 17th.
Thanks, David. So on the 17th, we're going to discuss appealing a denial, termination, or reduction or change in a service received through community health choices. And this is going to be about doing plan appeals. So it's an appeal to a plan, and we're going to review understanding the notices that people get when their services are changed, reduced, or denied. We're going to also discuss preparing for an appeal. And that's going to have a sort of general focus on what information you're going to want to get. And it'll actually have a little specific sub-focus on how to appeal issues around trying to get personal assistance service hours. And then we'll talk about the actual what happens at an appeal. And that will be it for that, and sort of briefly what the next steps are if that appeal is not successful.
Thank you, Amy. So a little bit about the Pennsylvania Health Law Project. We're a statewide nonprofit legal organization, and we're dedicated to ensuring access to public health coverage and services. We focus on medical assistance. We focus on the physical health components, the behavioral health components, and also on various waivers, including and in particular the new Community Health Choices program. We operate a helpline for clients and advocates, through which we provide free advice, brief services, and legal representation in administrative appeals and grievances, which Amy will talk about next week. We do community education and training such as this. We provide a series of self-help materials on our website, phlp.org. We have a monthly email newsletter, which you can sign up for, which is also free on our website, phlp.org. And we also are involved in a variety, of policy advocacy efforts. You can contact our helpline Monday, Wednesdays, or Fridays at 1-800-274-3258. Now, a few of the abbreviations that we're going to use here. CHC is Community Health Choices. CHC MCO refers to the Community Health Choices Managed Care Organization. So under Community Health Choices, individuals who are either what had been on the aging waiver or on the independents, some folks who had been on OBRA and folks on the ComCare waiver, and individuals who have both medical assistance and Medicare but are not in our intellectual disability system are enrolled in Community Health Choices, and through that enrolled into one of 3 managed care organizations who actually administer this program. Those 3 managed care organizations are AmeriHealth Caritas, who will be marketing in the Southeast as Keystone First, Pennsylvania Health and Wellness, and UPMC. 2 other abbreviations. PAS stands for Personal Assistance Services, which is one of the most commonly used services under the waivers that have been merged into Community Health Choices. And lastly, the Person-Centered Service Plan, and that's what I'm going to be talking about today. So how are the service needs under Community Health Choices determined? They're determined through a process we call person-centered planning. And that phrase actually appears in federal regulations, and it is mandatory on the state and on the managed care organizations to go through this process of person-centered planning in order to develop the service plan, which sets out the various services and supports that the individual would receive through their Community Health Choices managed care organization. So let's spend some time discussing how that planning process is supposed to take place under federal regulations and the state Community Health Choices agreement. So what is this person-centered planning? And here I'm quoting actually from a federal document. Person-centered planning is a process whereby the needs and preferences of the individual receiving services are described by that person in collaboration with family, friends, and other care team members to develop a plan of care that provides that individuals receive the covered services they need in a manner they prefer. So the purpose of person-centered planning, it goes beyond determining the participant's current service needs. It is also to assist the participant in developing a holistic vision of the life they want by identifying goals and outcomes. This process should be started without regard to specific waiver services, as there may be other sources of supports that can be identified. So we don't want to box people in to simply figuring out, okay, now we can give you X number of hours of personal assistance services, or we can give you some other service, community integration service, and we just focus narrowly on on those services. The requirement under federal law and under the state Community Health Choices Agreement is that we really start by looking at both the needs and the wishes, the vision, the outcomes, the goals of the individual. And then through the process, ultimately, we reach the end result of looking at services. Now, this process is done by a team. According to federal regulation, the individual or participant, we're going to call them participants here, that's the individual who has been enrolled in Community Health Choices. That participant will lead the person-centered process where possible. In addition, the participant is entitled to choose other people to be included in their person-centered planning process. The participant, those other individuals chosen by the participant, and the participant's service coordinator comprise the team that will do the planning. Now, according to the Community Health Choices Agreement, the planning meeting must be held and I quote, at times and locations of convenience to the individual. So how is this planning done? We've talked about by whom. Let's talk about the process. One key component is called the Comprehensive Needs Assessment. So according to the Community Health Choices Agreement, the Community Health Choices Managed Care Organization must assess a participant's physical health, behavioral health, social, psychosocial, environmental, caregiver, long-term services and supports, and other needs, as well as preferences, goals, housing, and informal supports. So this comprehensive needs assessment is supposed to be, in fact, quite comprehensive. The assessment is comprised of a proprietary tool that is something which is purchased by each of the three managed care organizations. It's called the InterRI, and it is a tool used nationally and in fact in some foreign countries for doing a variety of assessments. And a particular one we're using and is required by Pennsylvania for all three MCOs to use is the InterRI Home Care Assessment. And it is, it is designed to capture information regarding the degree of functional limitation the individual has in specific areas such as cognition, communication, behavior, and activities of daily living. Now, in addition to the InterRI, each Community Health Choices MCO has its own additional assessment tools, which cover areas that are not covered by the InterRI, such as employment. The assessments are done by the participant's service coordinator, and everyone who is enrolled in Community Health Choices who has been determined to have a need for long-term services and supports, that is, who had been receiving waiver services in the past or who need them now, will have a service coordinator who will be assigned by the plan, either someone who works directly for the managed care organization or an external service coordinating agency under contract to the plan. But either way, the service coordinators are actually serving a function for the managed care organization. Based on the information from the participant and others chosen by the participant, including providers, and other assessments in addition to the InterRI, medical records and other sources of information, that assessment is done. The service coordinator makes decisions regarding the degree of the participant's functional limitations that are listed on the InterRI form and on the managed care organization's additional assessment forms. And those decisions are supposed to be based on the information the service coordinator gets from the participant, from others that the participant has chosen to be in this service planning process, and other documents, medical records, etc. Additional areas that are required for the comprehensive needs assessment is the ability to manage and direct finances, the level of supervision required, what kind of supports may be needed for unpaid caregivers, identification of risks to the participant's health and safety, use of adaptive devices and assistive technology, environmental challenges to independence and safety concern, which includes the need for home modifications, the availability of able and willing unpaid supports like family members, preferences of the participant for involvement or engagement in community activities, and employment and educational goals. So last thing I mentioned there, goals. Goals are a critical part of any person-centered plan. In fact, the federal regulations require that all person-centered service plans, and I quote, include individually identified goals and desired outcomes. So a service plan doesn't just look at services, it has to identify the individual's goals and outcomes. And there needs to then be a link between those goals and outcomes and the individual's services. So it is really critical that the participant tell their service coordinator about their goals, their preferences, outcomes that they're seeking, and activities that are important to them before they get into a discussion about services. Because I can't emphasize this too much. The goals and outcomes drive the services. Goals are not services. They are what the participant seeks to do, and that's what should drive the determination of the service. So a few goals to consider, and these are just some ideas that people should think about. Employment and training. Do you want to work? Do you want to enroll in a job training program? There are several services in Community Health Choices that support employment. I also want to mention that most people can keep their eligibility for Community Health Choices waiver services even if they get a full-time job, especially through a special category of medical assistance called MAWD, medical assistance for workers with disabilities, under which a person's earned income, approximately 1/2 of their earned income, is disregarded in determining eligibility. So don't worry initially about whether your employment might affect your benefits. In addition, there's individualized counseling available regarding the effect of earnings on benefits for people who are on Social Security and SSI through 3 agencies: AHEAD, Goodwill, and Disability Rights of Pennsylvania. And you can find more information about those organizations. They're known as WIPA, W-I-P-A, through www.worksforme-pa.org. Worksforme, one word, -pa.org. And they have a great resource guide about this. Also, do you want to participate in community activities? That is a goal, or multiple goals, that you should think about in going through this person-centered planning process. Are there volunteer opportunities or community organizations you'd like to participate in? Communities of faith. Do you want to attend religious services or other religious programs? Again, there are waiver services that can assist in terms of getting you to the house of worship, or if you need an attendant to go with you to religious services that could enable you to participate, but you want to get that goal into your plan first. Some other goals to consider: housing or your living situation. Do you want to live in your own place? Do you want to move from where you are? Do you want to get in and out of your home without assistance? Do you want to control your home environment, lights, heat, etc. by yourself? So for example, home modifications are covered under Community Health Choices. Smart home technology that allow you to control your home environment can be covered under assistive technology as well. And also something new under Community Health Choices. Under the Community Health Choices Agreement, service coordinators are actually supposed to develop housing support plans for those individuals who state as one of their goals they wish to move, live in their own place. So that's something to consider as well. Education. Do you want to go to a school or college? Now, Community Health Choices is not going to pay the tuition, but they could pay, say, for example, for a personal assistant, personal care assistant, who could go to the classes with you to enable you to attend. Recreation and social activities. What do you enjoy doing? Again, there are services such as personal assistant services that can assist you in engaging in those activities, also what we call non-medical transportation, to get you there and back. Identify settings. So we've talked about goals which can lead to services, but in addition, we should consider the preferred settings for those activities. So for example, an individual might need assistance during the day. They could qualify for a personal assistant, this PAS, personal assistant services, in their home and the community, or for an adult day program. They're both very different. So it is important that the participants specify in their plan which of these settings they wish to receive their services in. Because again, going back to that federal regulation, participants do have the right to have their preference as to the setting in which they will receive their services. The Community Health Choices itself agreement says that participants are entitled to live and work in the setting of his or her choice. Now, why are these goals and settings critical? It's important that these goals and preferences for settings be included in the person-centered plan, because in order to have a service, that service must support a goal, outcome, an important activity, or a functional need which is specified in the participant's plan. And in that regard, I want to mention in the Community Health Choices Agreement, there is a definition of what's called medical necessity that applies not just to medical services, but also to waiver services. And if something meets, a particular service meets that definition, it is deemed to be medically necessary and therefore should be covered. I want to focus on the last test in of the 4 criteria for medical necessity, and that is where an item or service, and I'm quoting, will provide the opportunity for a participant receiving long-term services and supports to have access to the benefits of community living, to achieve person-centered goals, and to live and work in the setting of his or her choice. So here again, if the goals are in there, if the setting is specified in the plan, that makes the particular service that is being requested by the individual medically necessary under this definition. And Amy is going to talk more about that and how you prove that in the context of a grievance should you happen to appeal a denial. So we've gone through this process of the assessment that's done to determine functional limitations, and then the really important part of the participant and their team identifying goals, outcomes, and settings. And now we get to the part of identifying services. So after the participants' functional limitations are assessed and have identified their goals and outcomes, the service coordinator works with the participant and his or her team to determine the services and supports, both those that are funded under Community Health Choices and those that are not, which we call natural supports, that are needed to reach the individual's goals and outcomes given their functional limitations. Under the federal regulations, the person-centered service plan must reflect the services and supports that are important for the individual to meet the needs identified through an assessment of functional need, as well as what is important to the individual with regard to preferences for the delivery of such services and supports. So it is a balance between what's important for and what's important to the individual. Lastly, the community health choices managed care organizations cannot rely exclusively on the inter-eye assessment or their own additional assessment tools in developing person-centered plans. And this is a matter of both federal regulations and the Community Health Choices Agreement. Again, it's that combination of the assessment of functional limitations with the all-important identification of goals, outcomes, and preferences for settings that is done by the participant and those individuals the participant chooses to be involved in the person-centered service planning process. So some tips. The participant should ask the service coordinator to give them a copy of the plan before it's submitted to the MCO, then read the plan carefully or have a trusted person explain it before signing. I know that that has not always been done in the past, but it is my strong recommendation to insist on that because I have seen previously that plans that have been written up and submitted do not always contain all the goals and outcomes that the individual believes are important to them. Those goals and outcomes should be clearly stated along with the services and supports needed to accomplish them. And if the written plan does not include the participant's goals and outcomes, he or she should insist that the service coordinator revise the plan because the inclusion of the participants' goals and outcomes is mandated by federal law as well as the Community Health Choices Agreement. Now we have a number of resources which are available on our website that provide a lot more information, some very helpful worksheets developed by my colleague Janice Meinert, along with our advisory committee of individuals with disabilities who have really helped us put these materials together. And I would strongly urge you to check them out. I'll put one of them up so you can, if I can here. There we go. Here's one called My Life Vision Chart, which can, I think, be very helpful. And we have a number of these, one of which actually lists all the services under Community Health Choices so that an individual can go through this and figure out what services might fit their goals and outcomes. So let me go back here. Okay. Requests for additional hours of services. So we've been talking primarily about this initial plan, but if during the process of you have a plan in place, but you need additional hours of service, you ask your service coordinator to revise your person-centered plan to add the reasons why you believe you need more hours of service. It could be reduced functioning following an illness or injury, or it may be that you're seeking additional community activities or employment. The service coordinator is required to do another assessment if the need for additional services is the result of what the agreement calls a trigger event, which includes a significant change in your health function ability of an unpaid caregiver or upon your request, but it's not needed for every change. So if we have some questions, this would be a time now to ask them, and Amy and I will do our best to try and answer those.
Okay, yeah, it looks like we have a few questions.
Okay.
The first one is more of a comment, and someone said, UPMC uses their own assessment tool to determine the amount of weekly hours and will not consider doctor scripts or anything outside of their software.
I would say that is problematic, and we would like to hear about that from particular individuals who have not been able to get that information in, because that is not the way the federal regulations envisage person-centered service planning. The individual should be able to present additional information that's relevant and not be restricted by the particular software that any managed care organization uses. So you have our phone number there. You have our website. We would urge you to contact us with specific examples where that inability to provide that additional information may have resulted in a service plan which does not fully reflect either the goals, outcomes, or the needs of that individual.
Okay. Someone asked, how would you describe and summarize the differences, if any, between the existing person-centered planning process and the process under Community Health Choices?
The existing process, quite frankly, varied quite a lot in my experience between different service coordinating agencies. So for some folks, the process may be very similar. One difference, however, is the use of the standardized assessment, the inter-I, which had not been used previously. So this determination of the level of functional limitation is new. But the importance and the right to have your goals and outcomes in your service plan is something that has been in effect, although not always done properly, in previous to Community Health Choices.
Okay, someone asked, how often is the support coordinator required to create a plan or goal with the participant?
Well, there's an annual review, but it can be done more frequently if there has been a significant change in the individual's health or their functional needs, or the loss of a caregiver, or a change in community activities or employment. So other than the annual review, it could be done at any time in between where circumstances warrant it.
Okay. Will the person-centered planning process take place for dual eligibles not receiving waiver services, or is it just for waiver recipients?
There is supposed to be an assessment to determine the need for services and a plan, but quite frankly, I confess I have not focused on the extent of the planning process for dual eligibles. That's something actually I would ask Amy if you can jot that down, and maybe you can answer that one during your session, because I don't honestly know the full extent of what the planning process is required for dual. And by the way, when we say dual eligibles, we're talking about people who have medical assistance and Medicare. And the folks I assume you're talking about are those folks who have both medical assistance, Medicare, but do not need at this point, or do not meet, I should say, do not meet the eligibility requirements for waiver services. That is, they are not assessed as being nursing facility clinically eligible. So they don't get the full range of waiver services.
And I can just jump in really quickly. It's not as extensive. It's not the whole comprehensive needs assessment and dry, but there is a requirement for care management plans to be put into place to make sure that all the people's needs are addressed. And I can answer it more fully next week.
Okay. What advice would you give people whose service coordinators don't fully capture their needs, values, and preferences during the assessment and planning process?
Okay, so for one thing, there is a grievance process that Amy is going to talk about in detail. However, I think the first thing is to ask to talk to the service coordinator's supervisor. And in another way to express your dissatisfaction is there should be a sign-off sheet for your service plan, and you can either refuse to sign or you can write in which services you disagree with. The plans also have their own internal complaint processes for situations where you have an issue with an individual who is not performing their job the way they're supposed to. So you have the what's called a complaint, and a complaint, by the way, is actually recognized as a form of appeal. You have the grievance that Amy will talk about, and you can always go through the chain of command, ask for the supervisor or the individual above the supervisor, typically called a manager. And you can refuse to sign off on your service plan.
How heavily does or should the inter-eye assessment influence the planning process? If the assessment identifies health risks, for example, but the focus person or planning team does not identify them in their goals, does the inter-eye assessment come into play?
Wow. So it does come into play when we talk about health risks. The individual has the right to make decisions about what risks they are willing to assume, provided that they are mentally competent to do so. But it has to be discussed. So if a health risk is identified in the inter-eye assessment, the service coordinator does need to discuss that risk and discuss how that risk might be mitigated to see if there are some options that may be less intrusive to the individual, the participant, and his or her team. But ultimately, the participant has the right to say, I will assume that risk as long as it is an informed choice.
Okay, someone asked, if a member is unable to communicate their needs, is the family contacted to participate in the person-centered planning meeting? And if so, and also, how would the family know if a meeting took place?
So when the individual enrolls, they should be given an opportunity to designate other representatives who could assist the individual in these team meetings. As far as the notification, quite honestly, we haven't seen how that's working yet. So that remains to be seen. And that's something we're very interested in hearing about because it is important that those individuals who are unable to speak for themselves have other folks who are familiar with their, not just their needs, which can be determined through the inter-eye, but also their goals and their preferences.
Okay, someone asked, very few people I know have met with their CHC service coordinator, yet they are getting hours cut. What recourse is there if the person-centered plans are not being done appropriately and the MCOs are just deciding how much help they want to give?
Right. So Amy is going to talk about that in detail, and I'll let her do a quick blurb on that one right now, if you could.
Okay, so we have also seen examples of people getting hours cut. So there's a couple things to keep in mind. First of all, the person-centered service planning process has to be complete in order for anybody who's getting services under continuity of care, under the continuing their waiver services, before any of those cuts can go into effect. So if that hasn't happened, first of all, we are interested in hearing about those cases and seeing whether there is a person-centered service plan and what it looks like, and seeing the notices that people are receiving. So we are interested in that, and it should be appealed, but we're also working with trying to bring some examples to the Office of Long-Term Living so that people don't actually experience these cuts until all the things that are supposed to be done have been done. The second thing is the notices have been problematic and don't necessarily explain why hours are being cut, and that makes them inadequate. And so there is a requirement that the plans give a reason beyond this is just what you were assessed as, or it's not medically necessary. So we want to see those as well. And if somebody actually has hours reduced, right now the department is looking at all of the notices, so people really shouldn't be getting their hours reduced if the notices are not good. So please do share those examples with us so we can give some advice. We might be able to assist, but we will also want to be able to sort of collate all this information and make sure that these things are corrected.
Okay. How would the housing goals be accommodated given the severe lack of affordable housing in some areas?
Right. So quite honestly, there's no simple answer to that. I can say that the 3 managed care organizations have identified staff who are responsible for looking at housing in a broad scope. And there seems to be some interest in the managed care organizations to actually provide some financing for some housing. For example, for individuals coming out of nursing facilities, the nursing home transition folks, the managed care organizations have agreed in many cases to provide a rental subsidy for those individuals for a certain period of time to enable them to move out. So I think we are going to continue to advocate with the managed care organizations to try to engage them in helping to finance some affordable housing, either through joint projects with community development organizations or through some kind of rental subsidies. In addition, the individual housing planning process will look at things like getting on to the housing choice voucher, or also called Section 8 list, which understand in many areas you can't even apply, but in some areas you can. We'll look at bringing people together as housemates so they can share expenses. So that's another possibility. We'll also look at other funding opportunities, such as what's called the Section 811 project, which goes through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And there is a whole system where people are tracked and matched to available apartments, people with disabilities, under this particular program, which receives federal funding through HUD. And then looking at local opportunities such as local housing trust funds, and also a program run by a Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency called FARE, as P-H-A-R-E, which provides some funding for local housing developers to develop low-income housing. So there are a variety of sources out there. The idea is that someone who is knowledgeable of those sources would look into those for individuals, determine what's available in terms of low income, for example, apartments. There are also some individuals that I've worked with who have actually become homeowners, people who have been on waivers, who have gotten together and purchased homes through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency first-time home buyer mortgage products, and those are very useful as well. So it's I'll tell you the truth, it's very difficult, and I can't say it can be done for everybody, but there are a variety of funding sources out there, and by matching people and combining folks so that they can pool their resources and their income, and searching out these various funding opportunities, and bringing the managed care organizations into the mix so that they hopefully will contribute to some of these programs is the way I think it needs to be done.
Okay, someone asked, if the plan cannot be self-managed because the focused person is unwilling to participate in goal setting, does not demonstrate clinical insight into their limitations, or is disengaged from the planning process, what may happen?
Ouch. So in that situation, my hope would be that the individual could be convinced to sign a power of attorney that would enable a trusted person, friend or family member who would be engaged, who could do that for them. If not, it is a challenge in that situation. So I don't know that I have a good answer if the individual is unwilling to be engaged and unwilling to sign a POA for someone else to serve in that capacity. I don't know, Amy, if you've had any success with that in your previous practice in New York.
So there was a little less, at least in our managed long-term services and supports, a little less care planning. There was some done in we had a dual demonstration, which was like combined dual eligible. It's kind of like yours, but it's fully integrated. All their Medicare and Medicaid was under one plan. So there was some there. But I guess this was also something we used to struggle with. It's important to engage family members. There's, like you said, and for family members, when you know that there are signs, to sort of engage them about actually doing powers of attorneys early. So, and talk to the member so that this is something that can be avoided down the road. But these are the really gnarly situations where somebody has capacity issues. but they're not, such capacity issues that they need a guardian that it's hard. It's kind of you do the best you can. It was a hard question.
Okay, someone else asked, will CHC likely have any positive impact on holding home health aides responsible for carrying out the care needs of waiver recipients? Under the current system, it seems like accountability of home health aides is a major downfall.
So the Community Health Choices managed care organizations are ultimately responsible, and they can hold the agencies that the home health aides work for accountable. So will it work out so that there's better monitoring? I can't say yet, but clearly the responsibility lies with those managed care organizations.
Okay. If individuals have been told their need has been submitted to the CHC plan and no action has occurred, what is the next step?
So it's our opinion that an individual could file a grievance for failure of the Community Health Choices managed care plan to act on their service plan, because we believe that failure to act is a de facto denial. So that's one tool. Obviously, trying to contact the managed care organization would be your first step. But if that doesn't get you anywhere, I would recommend filing a grievance. And Amy, do you have any other suggestions?
No, the grievance is the way to go. Depending on the service, there are actually deadlines for making a decision, although a lot of these services that we're talking about today, some of the home, supports like the pest eradication and things like that, don't have a clear deadline for the plan to make a determination. But filing a grievance is helpful. If you can get any information on what the holdup is, that might be helpful, because we have had examples of there being a computer glitch, and that's kind of something that we want to hear about if there's some kind of systemic issues with not authorizing services timely.
Okay, someone asked, doesn't the participant have to sign their service plan upon assessment? And wouldn't that negate someone claiming they weren't really assessed?
That they weren't really assessed. We have actually been urging the Office of Long-Term Living to require plans to give participants an option to indicate when they sign that they have a disagreement with some portion of their plan, or they believe they have not been assessed properly. And we think that is in fact something that's actually a requirement under federal law, and so people should have that opportunity. And the plans at the Managed Long-Term Services and Supports Advisory Committee last week all said that if an individual expressed some disagreement with their plan or how it was done, that they would consider that a grievance and would have to be handled through the grievance process, and that they would investigate into that. Now, remains to see how that's actually going to work. But according to the 3 plans, they said that individual has a right to say to their service coordinator, I don't agree with how this is done or what the plan is, and the responsibility, according to the plans of the service coordinator, is then to report that as a disagreement which triggers a grievance.
Okay, someone asked, do you know how support coordinators are supposed to communicate to participants about the different services provided? Some services are new and participants may not be aware of them.
Right. So the one thing is, let me go back here. In our resources, we have actually have done a list of those services, so those can be downloaded and shared with participants and with their family members, so they can see the services with a short description that helps explain to them what the services are for. As far as the role of the service coordinator, again, the first thing is to focus on the goals and outcomes and preferences as to settings, and then the service coordinator's responsibility is then to consider, going through that list of covered services, which of those or which combination of those can best meet the individual's needs, preferences, goals, and outcomes. So it is a large responsibility. The MCOs have told us they've trained the service coordinators, and after we have had a number of reports of inadequate service person-centered planning, they have gone back and are retraining those service coordinators in this whole process, which would include identifying the appropriate services and discussing those services. So it is a training matter. They have said they're retraining about this, but we definitely want to hear about situations where information, relevant information about the appropriate services have not been presented to participants, because we do have ongoing conversations with top people in the Office of Long-Term Living. We report back to them, and thankfully they have taken our concerns seriously and have really been pushing the managed care organizations to do this right. Have actually put the plans into what's called corrective action plans, where they have to report back on what they've done to better train these service coordinators in doing this critical task.
Okay, and then the last question that we have, someone wrote, thank you so much for this presentation today. How do we find out which hospitals, doctors, rehabs, and agencies, et cetera, are part of each MCO?
Okay, and there is a website for that, and I don't have it. Amy, do you have the website that lists the enrollment website?
Don't have it handy. Hold on.
We'll see if we
Someone wrote in and said that it's enrollchc.com.
Thank you. Enrollchc.com. Thank you. I should memorize that. I will say that the website is a first step, but we have found that there are some providers who may be newly enrolled and haven't shown up yet in the website. Also, I can say that when you talk about hospitals, you have to be careful, because it's not just the hospital. Nowadays, we have health systems where you have a hospital, maybe multiple satellite hospitals, and various physician practices, labs, diagnostic tests, a variety of different components. And so it may not be that every part of the health system is enrolled. For example, a specialist practice that may be connected to a particular hospital/health system may or may not be enrolled. So it's usually a good idea to double check if you have an existing relationship with a particular practice, to double check with them to make sure that they are in fact enrolled. Okay, if that's it, we appreciate you participating in this. You can sign up for our newsletter at staff@phlp.org. You have our helpline number there, 1-800-274-3258. Our website, phlp.org. And we encourage you to register for the next exciting installment on appeals and grievances that Amy is going to do on July 17th. Thank you so much.